Very, very cool score, Tyson. Once again, just like with Andrew before, I wish that you had had time to um, turn in a complete score all the way through to the end of D, such as at your level the of support, the Brev level of support. But it's okay. It's just there's plenty enough for me to talk about, and I'll throw in some more time than I would normally talk about for a score, say at the semi brev level, which is a section A plus B. All right. So the first thing we got to talk about is not like one thing I really hate to do is pick on people's mock-ups, because the thing about it is that I can totally understand and hear what you intend on the score page, right? It just, I see it and I hear it. It's just like somebody picking up like a book or a script to a play or something like that, and just hearing the voices and the words inside their head. So to me, it's no problem. But the thing about it is that, like, you just have to think about preparing for a demo. Say you're working in a situation where there are people who aren't musicians who need to approve your score or need to work on your score, or people who say like don't come from like a really high level music reading background. Say like you're working with a choir or with say like musical theater or something like that. So you probably will need a better sound set. So once again, not to turn this into an advertisement for Note Performer, but I think Note Performer would work really great. And I don't know if it's compatible with what you're working with. I don't know if it's MuseScore. MuseScore is sort of getting a look that's very much modeled after Dorico. So if this is MuseScore, then cool. Just like see if you can run a Note Performer alongside it. It's very cheap, and it would really improve a lot of the sounds. Like for instance, like the harp sounded sort of like a guitar playing harmonics, right? And the winds, like the oboe was so powerful that I couldn't hear the flute above it, right? So if there's a way of mixing the sounds, like even just that as a start, like if you can hear like your oboe marked piano and is playing back at like forte or fortissimo, so you can't hear the instruments around it, then just see if you can just mix things a little bit more realistically. All right, even if you can't get Note Performer quite yet. All right, so all that said, watch out for things like this. La Melodia Ben blank. So it's like La Melodia Ben what? It's like, well, what? It's sort of Ben means like, well, as in very well done or something, like, very, like Ben tenuta, very well, very heavy or very well marked, So don't knock off the end of things like this. And if they are placed like in underneath the staff in the piano part, then that's where you should put them too, and they should be in italic text. Okay. And here you say tempo cantando, piomoso. So, I mean, like the tempo of a song, I guess, is what you mean. So, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it just those things are kind of not very clear, right? So I think a tempo is fine, and then saying cantando on your singing instruments, on your melody instruments, is probably what's needed, right? Because the instruments that are going to play accompanying roles like don't really need, they're not playing in a singing style, they're just accompanying, right? Okay, all right, so let's talk over like the beginning here. So one of my hopes, one of my aspirations, one of my criteria for evaluating this section was to think about whether or not the treatment represented an emotional and timbral progression, right? And that's not necessarily the end-all be-all of how this could be done, like to insist on changes, like if, an evolving textural approach or anything like that. That doesn't have to be the goal of every single orchestration. However, um, you do bring in a little bit of variation. I thought that the pizzicato was very cool. I mean, it called attention to itself a little bit. And it's interesting that you're marking it mezzo piano, and your wind instruments are at piano, right? So like you're basically saying, hey, this part is in the foreground, and these are a little bit in the background. So watch out for that. They should all be the same dynamic, okay? So I would say if this is piano, this should be piano, right? So unless you go crescendo, like let's say you went to crescendo to mezzo piano here, which is not, um, da 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 da. So here you've got a crescendo, and you don't quite tell us like where you're going, right? And here, like if you're saying crescendo here, and you have two crescendo hairpins, you don't need the word crescendo, right? It's right there in the in this, and you could just make this into one long continuous hairpin. That's what I would do. Okay. And then, what dynamic will the music be by the time you get to here? If you have a crescendo there, will it be mezzo piano by the time you get here and mezzo forte? See, that's why it's really important to be really clear. Like, if you have a destination dynamic, how big are you going to get here? So if it's only just a pair of hairpins, that's fine. But then if you have somebody coming in late, they kind of need to know how loud they need to be on their crescendo. So if this is starting off mezzo piano crescendo to whatever, then everybody's mezzo forte, right? But like you don't have to have that, but it's just it's just a sign that you're thinking over that part. Now, one last little thing, one notation thing, which I think is really important. You're not really telling us who is playing what when in your winds and brass, right? See, here you have four horns in F, watch out for stuff like that. Here you have two clarinets in A and A. Four horns in F, okay, and you don't tell us which ones they are. With four available players, you have two parts. So are these players doubling up? Is it like A2, like or A2? Right? Is this two players on one note in each part, or is this just like the first and the third? Now, if this is just intended to be two players, I would actually double up the first and the second part together because they're playing very close. Like when you have soft, close intervals, it's really better to have first and second playing them, right? Because that makes it more intimate. They know, like the second player is so aware of every single quirk, every single twitch of the intonation of the first player, right? The second player is got an eagle ear, right? As far as do eagles hear well, but like they've got a real focus on that, right? And once again, you sort of have different dynamics in different parts, right? So you have a big, nice long crescendo in your, I guess, third horn maybe, and then third and fourth horn, and then you have like nothing in your first horn or first and second horn. I'm not sure who is playing what. And then here you have two hairpins in a row, and I think that this is just one, right? This is just one long crescendo from piano to forte. Now, having said that, yeah, I really love the way that you are using, you're actually avoiding mezzo dynamics in a lot of places. Like here you use mezzo piano, you don't really need to, it could just be piano. Here you're using mezzo forte, but like most of the dynamics are piano or forte, and I think that's a great thing. Like you are committing to an actual soft or loud approach. And there are so many scores where like everything is mezzo, 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 right? So I really like your commitment to the actual place where the instruments sound at their best, right? I think that a solo violin played piano is much more beautiful and poetic than a solo violin played mezzo piano. A trumpet that's played forte is so much more convincing than a trumpet that is played mezzo forte, right? But this is all conditional. They're like their mezzo dynamics are a boon to film scoring, right? That's the flip side of it. Where do you end up using mezzo dynamics a lot? Well, you want the music to inhabit a scene, but you don't want it to take over, but you don't want it to be wimpy, right? So there's that kind of middle area. But it just, but we're talking about concert music now, right? All right, now here you have like a crescendo here, and then you have a forte way over here, and you don't have it in both parts. Right, so this is just piano with a little crescendo. So, you really need to proofread or edit your dynamics and just really, decide what I don't see. Like I don't understand this. Why are you going diminuendo and then suddenly crescendo here in your clarinets? This doesn't seem to be any point to it, right? Okay, all right, but back to like telling us who's playing what, right? Is this first flute or second flute? Is this first oboe or second oboe? Is it two oboes, right? Is it two oboes at once? And what do you mean by this? Like here, like you're almost saying that you have two bass clarinet parts, right? Like here, you're putting in a first voice rest, and you've got a second voice part. So does this mean there are two bass clarinetists? Right, that's what this means, right? First voice and second voice. Then here, like you have a second voice oboe. So does this mean that it was all first oboe up to here, and then you switched over to second oboe? Right, so it's just very unclear. So watch out for those little details, okay? All right, now just in terms of like the actual scoring of this, it was actually really nicely done. Aside from my desire to have more of an emotional progression, I feel you could have done a little bit more taking us through these 10 bars, right? And just like every step along the way, like there's a new meaning. It's like a paragraph in a book, right? So I like the swell here, but like here we've got a crescendo, and it would be nice if the crescendo actually went somewhere, like not just like piano to mezzo piano and back, right? And like just get rid of the crescendo and the diminuendo if you're going to use the hairpins. You don't need them. You're already telling us that. So crescendo to where? To mezzo forte? To forte? To mezzo piano? Like how big of a crescendo do you want? Tell us. Make these long, consistent hairpins all the way to the middle of this bar. Okay, and then the diminuendo and clearing up what's going on, who's playing what, and so on and so forth. So all that, with all that technical stuff, it's a nice, solid approach, almost textbook as we're seeing now. To have first flute and first oboe with the clarinets playing thirds below, and then adding this little feature, I think brings in a lot of interest. I would say that if you're going to go crescendo up to mezzo forte, then your pizzicato accompaniment should also increase, but you should start at piano once again. Right, and then diminuendo. If everybody's going diminuendo, your pizzicato should go diminuendo. I love this right in here. So I feel that this really does it for me. Like the my whole need to see, as an orchestrator myself, my desire to see some kind of an emotional and timbral progression. I think that this really does, just beautifully comes in at the end of those winds. Feel it's a very creative thing to do, and you sort of swell into it and then pull back, and you got a little bit of a rest, and then you start again with the winds, and because they're just winds, it's a new texture, right? Okay, and then this is really set up in the same way as the winds were before, right? So we've got octave violins. We've got second violins and thirds. Now here's where you would have to put in, like, forget about La Melodia, Ben whatever, right? Which should go down here if you're going to include it at all. You could just say the same thing like espressivo. You don't need to put this in. All right, this is an indication to a player who is playing both the melody and the accompaniment, right? So it's saying, hey, the melody in this piece has to do something, which is, so you cut off what it was, but but you don't need to say that because these people are doing nothing but playing the melody. So they don't need to know what the melody is in comparison to the accompaniment, because they're not in charge of the accompaniment, right? So all you have to do is just say espressivo or whatever it was that you cut off here, right? All right, just say, Ben whatever if you need to, or just say espressivo. Now here you have like a real inconsistency of slurs. Now, having said that, I think this is a nice, solid approach to the accompaniment. I think it's very cool. You're not leaving any gaps, like I saw in some other arrangements, except for like right in here. But, everything is nicely connecting. I would say you could get rid of these gaps, right? Connect to some sort of middle voice. That's what you need to do, even if you're just dovetailing from pitches and other parts, right? Yeah, don't leave the gaps. But, like, it's not so egregious as, like, da-da, rest, da-da, rest, da-da, rest. Just really imitating the way that the left hand was set up. Which is something I warned about in the pitfalls. So please, people, watch the pitfalls, because if you do it in a way that is different, and it doesn't justify itself, then I'll comment on it. All right. And so, you already have your answer, right, for my criteria. Okay. So the whole thing is like here you're going, with a bowing, it's going down, up, and then down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, and so on. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, I would say just have it all slurred all the way through. Each beam group or group of notes, like you could slur. I would say slur, like, so this could be a down bow, and that could be an up bow, and then a down bow, and an up bow, right? And then here you could go down bow, up bow, and then the players will probably just stick in another up bow here, right? So that it matches with the cellos. This is why you have a concert master making little suggestions about how to solve little problems like that. But anyway, so one way or another, this should all be slurred. All the beam groups should be slurred. Okay, so that it is a beautiful, smooth sound, right? You want it to flow just like the left hand would for, a Rachmaninoff prelude or a Barvinsky prelude, right? You want it to flow in that beautiful, style, but you don't want it to be slavishly pianistic. And I like the changes that you made. Yeah. All right, and your crescendo. I mean, who's involved in this crescendo? Like P, M, F. Or you just want it to be soft and then suddenly mezzo forte? No, I think you intended everybody to crescendo through to here. Yeah, I'm wondering if perhaps some of this is like just getting used to the this is your first score using this application, and there were some things that took getting used to, and so like some things wouldn't kind of obey your desires, and you ended up like not editing things as much just out of sheer annoyance. I don't know. But I mean, shouldn't this be crescendo to P, from P to F, same both things, and then diminuendo here at the end in all the instruments, right? Like, shouldn't the dynamic arc be consistent? I think this is fine to have mezzo forte in the accompaniment and the melody to be forte, and I think it's also fine to start off with all of your section piano. I think that's totally fine, right? They're just moderating it here a little bit, because you're crossing into the territory of the harmony part, right? So it just helps to keep this a separation. All right, so now trumpet takes over, and you've got the horns playing the middle voice. And once again, you have to mark who is who, and you have to mark who is who for your trumpets, right? You have 3 trumpets in C. Who's this guy? Is this trumpet number 1? We assume, we hope. Is it a duet, right? Is this 2 trumpet players? Is it 3 trumpet players? Are you getting really ambitious here? Or are you adding one? Like, is this the first player and the first and second and then the third? Because you get up, like, so you have all 3 players when you get to the D? What's going on here? You got to tell us. Don't put a crescendo mark over a staff, okay? Or just get rid of it because you don't need it. You've got your hairpins. Okay, but I mean, so it's very cool. I mean, I like the way that you have like you have your melody in your trumpet. You've got your middle voice in the horns, and then you've got these flowing lower winds. Now, I think that lower strings. So I was thinking of talking about the lower winds in a second, and I just popped that in when I meant lower strings. I think that, like, and I'm actually wondering, is this intended to be pizzicato here? Or, is it just, and what's the dynamic? Right? So if this is a pluck, then this note could be doubled by contrabassoon or like first or second bassoon on a staccato, and then you would get more weight without too much more intensity, right? And then right in here, these parts here could be doubled by bassoons, bass clarinet, whatever, just to give them a little bit more presence against the horns and the trumpet. And, like when I say presence, I don't mean necessarily like dynamic strength, although there is an added layer of dynamic strength. It's not really about adding dynamic strength. It's about, thickening the tone, right? Like doubling wind instruments doesn't necessarily make them twice as loud, right? Even doubling like a a horn part technically does not exactly make it twice as loud, but it does definitely match the presence of a single heavy brass player, right? So that's the whole Rimsky-Korsakov math. But in this case, I would be saying, like, since you have so much tone weight, right? There's another way of putting it. Tone weight is not necessarily volume, okay? So tone weight, you have more tone weight in your horns and your trumpets, right, than 3 string sections. All right, so so adding some doubling here in the winds would just really help firm up these lines. That's all I'm saying. And it doesn't have to be very much. It could be like you could have like contrabassoon playing staccato along to this pizzicato, or if these are just plain ordinary notes, maybe you could have the contrabassoon playing like tenuto staccato, just to kind of like add a little bit of push. And then you could have first and second bassoons playing this, or you could have bassoon on the bottom and bass clarinet there, and then when this comes in, that could be clarinet, right? There's just ways of doing this. I think it just needs a little bit more presence there, a little bit more tone weight. All right. Now going on, we get into this section here, and I have to say that I differ from your approach. I feel that that I'm actually kind of wondering whether you intended to have these be longer, but maybe there's something about the application that wouldn't let you, or it just was hard to organize. Because I feel like this could be a nice long dotted half note tied to a dotted quarter note, right? And same thing here, right? So I just think it needs to be a little bit longer, and I still feel like the dynamics are a little inconsistent, right? You got this piano crescendo to what, right? Like if this is going to answer at forte, then you have to tell your cellos that you are crescendoing to forte. Like just because this line has continuity in under the left hand of a pianist doesn't mean that the players have any idea what the other person is doing, right? So you have to manage it, right? So, and if you intend the same thing here, like piano crescendo, so what dynamic are you going to stay, like what are you going to be playing the dynamic? Is this player going to be playing the dynamic of whatever's left over at the end of this diminuendo, right? Or are they going to crescendo into this, or what's going on, right? We need to know a little bit more clearly. And I feel that like this mezzo piano on these parts here, it just kind of takes away some of the strength. So I'm not too sold on the dynamics the way that they're scored here, but it feels to me a little bit like you intended to do a lot more here. So I'm not going to critique it too much, right? But like here we've got winds taking over on some of the flowing lines and trading off to the strings. Okay, all fair enough. But what if you had winds and strings to begin with going into this part? Then you could have done more variation with the two parts combining, and like rather than transcribing it, you could have adapted it, right, and had it go in directions that help to set this up a little bit better, right? Perhaps. But I think it's really cool the way you have this these sort of downward limping flute and piccolo, and I think that this is a nice place where you could have introduced like mezzo staccato, or tenuto staccato, or even like portato. So kind of coming over the top, and I see like you're trying to leave space for your very very soft flute, but like you could also do that with forte piano, right? I think this needs to be filled in somehow more than just you're doing right in there. And then here you have your beautiful glittering rolled harp, which is all fine, but I'm wondering if you could have made it. These are chords that could be played with one hand. The harpist has got four usable fingers on each hand, and so you could have made this even more beautiful and gushing right in here, I think. And and if you just really wanted to keep it stripped back and say, Thomas, I don't agree with you about the whole thing about doubling up the winds and the strings and then going forward and developing it more, that's all fine. You don't have to. But what if you had a way of alternating your colors more, right? So that it was like bass clarinet going into clarinet and then coming back into bassoon or something. Here you've got some dovetailing between the parts, but like, could there be some connection of a clarinet sound to a different family of the, family member of a different member of the different family in the wind section? All right. So I won't be too picky about it, but just the dynamics, you need to tell people where they're going if the line is flowing. And you also have to fill in all of the slurs, right? So, do you really want, down, up, slur, down, up, down, or if the slur is on a down bow, then up, down, up, right? Maybe you worked this out really carefully, but I have to say that I really feel that it should flow more, right? And there should be more slurs. Okay, all right, so now we're getting to this beautiful magical part. And I have to say that, like, I think this was a really great idea. But you know what? You could have gone diminuendo in all of your parts to a pianissimo, right? And then you could have had your winds start off piano and then increase to a forte, right? Because I feel that, like, having this being piano crescendo, right, up to, say, mezzo piano, mezzo forte, and then just having everybody play loudly all the way to here, I think you take away some of the magic. Like, we don't have that kind of sense of, like, that hushed silence into which you hear the sound of a beautiful bird or a woman singing out in the forest as, she's coming home after gathering sticks or something. There's something really beautiful. Like, I think Barvinsky's whole point here in his preludes is he observes the magic in common people's lives, and he's transforming it into something that's eternal. It's almost like he's the observer above this village or this beautiful place in nature where people come and go, and he's our reporter, right? He's like noticing those wonderful things about everyday life which people take for granted, perhaps. But no matter, whatever he is possibly doing, I like the dovetailing right in here. I think that's all very, very cool. I think that's all very usable, and you can crescendo through it, right? You can start off piano, crescendo to mezzo piano, crescendo to mezzo forte, crescendo to forte, right? And show your destination dynamics in each little section of the phrase. And then your oboe just comes over the top, and then you're playing this, right? And here, I think that you could add a little bit, you could have a little bit more, have maybe just a little bit fuller of a chord in your winds, right? And then, here, the strings answering, I think these should all be slurred, and take the same exact approach. See here, this is good. You're coming down to pianissimo, and same thing here. Start off piano, crescendo to mezzo piano, and so on and so forth. Slur, 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 slur. Right? Make it smooth, not just da 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 dee da dee do dee do da ya ba ya. You know what I mean? Just make it all consistent going across. And, there's so many things you could do here. You could make these solo instruments, right? So this could be solo cello, dovetailing to solo viola, dovetailing to solo second violin, and then a first violin, right? There's a bunch of things you could do here. But, I feel that the harp was a little... It felt to me like it was interfering with the beautiful purity of the line. What if the harp just kind of rolled a big, beautiful chord, and the winds carried the chord, like whatever chord the harp was playing, maybe six or seven note chord, was carried forward by very soft winds, while strings or maybe solo strings played over, right? And this is nice. So you're coming in here. We've got this. So what do you mean by assai? Ritardando? Assai? I mean, I don't understand what you mean by assai. What are you assaying? And what is the quantum here that you want to exaggerate or you want to underline? I'm not understanding what you mean. Maybe the diminuendo down to the P, or I don't get it. Anyways, okay, so here you've got contrabassoon doubling with pizzicato double basses, and I feel that this should be staccato, so staccato eighth notes, not staccato dotted quarter notes, but just like doink, 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 doink. All right, to double the pluck, 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 pluck. All right, okay, so what happens here in the piano music? Nothing but the melody, right? So I don't understand what this is doing here, right? Maybe this was leading into something that you had planned for section C and you just didn't get a chance to get to it. Okay, so that's all fair. But I just feel that like you've already set everything up so beautifully here. You've got you got your clarinets playing this little bit of figuration here, and you've got the strings pushing towards the meeting up with the oboe, which by the way I think should dovetail in some way, or maybe slightly. Well, it does slightly overlap, but in that case you should have a diminuendo, So it just really lets go underneath the oboes. So anyhow, you've got this solo. It should really be marked solo, right? And all of these should be marked solo, right? And they should definitely tell us which one is which, right? So this could be like, number one period solo, right? And then you don't need to do that with the bass clarinet. Just say solo. But here, like number one solo for your solo clarinetist, and then here number one solo for your oboist. Now, give your solos to your principal players. That's their job, okay? Unless you're Dvorak and you want to give your second flute a bunch of stuff. That's fine too, but like for this purpose, for this kind of thing, trust your principal players. They are gorgeous. They know what to do, and the second players are also really competent, and they can be just as good as the firsts, but that's not necessarily their job to play solos all the time. So, give it to the firsts as a default. All right. All right. So here the players are pushing, and I feel like you're running the risk of the winds being really loud here, just when you're trying to bring everything down, right? So I think just get rid of the hairpin, right, and let the dynamic arc be in the strings. Okay, so but we're back to the whole question of these pizzicatos and what do they add? Well, there's kind of nothing, da 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 da, and then it's okay for there to be nothing, right? Just imagine the power of this entire phrase orchestrally, like you are, you've had this beautiful flight of fancy and just, arcing over the top here, and, and then the strings answer it, and it brings everything back, and there's a little bit of ritardando, and it's pulling back to just this beautiful oboe solo. And you know what? This oboe solo does not need any help from the pizzicato in the middle strings. That could just go away. And as far as the audience is concerned, they don't need this in here. The audience is just focusing on the absolute beauty of this incredible line, and this is just a distraction. So I would just say leave it out. It's not on the piano part. Just bag it, right? Anyway, so those are my thoughts on this. Just much too short. Entry to the 2022 Orchestration Challenge, and just really enjoyable, Tyson. I've been chopping this to bits and saying you should have done this, or I hear this here, or whatever. But overall, I hope you'll agree that I have been looking at your approach, what you intended to do, what was your goal, to what kind of color you wanted to create and everything else. And all I'm trying to do is tell you how to get there, perhaps in the most professional way possible, right? Just using the most craft that I would know how to make what you imagined work, right? And what things maybe work against it, like the harp right in here, or this pizzicato just interfering with the wonderful solitude of the oboe, or maybe maintaining the sense of sustain that is in the piano score, right? Just like the way these hold, right? I mean, this stuff is beautiful right in here. This descending piccolo and flute and so on, and and maybe encouraging you to explore a little bit more. Is there more meaning you could bring into this entire phrase so that it tells a story a little bit more? Like right now, it's telling a very simple story, right? But is there more emotional depth? Is there more you could bring to this tale? A few adverbs and adjectives, in other words, right? Is there more color that could be injected in here without being obvious or anything? But is there some way to just bring out a little bit more emphasis, more strength when you want to emphasize some particular phrase and its meaning? Okay? And while I absolutely approve of you not slurring across repeated notes, bravo for that. I've seen it too many times. Just like the previous score, Andrew's score, you don't have any slurs at all in this section, right? So I think you could have slurred like half bars, right? So play and then slur this middle, and then this could be a little bit longer, right? You don't have to have a rest there. And same thing here, you don't have to have such a pronounced rest. I like the idea of having some gaps, that's fine. But you could slur down here. You could have like maybe a portato here, like a tenuto mark on each note with a slur over it, so like it's kind of pushing from the stomach. And slur this right in here maybe. There's and this could be ya da da. Like you could slur all the way down to this and then have a note that is individually articulated. All right, so those are my thoughts about this. I think it's just a very cool score, very beautiful, and I love the simplicities. They're not simple because you can't think of anything else. They're simple because you are being very judicious, and I really respect that and appreciate it. So if my suggestions and feedback and everything else were helpful, then great. I really hope so, and I really appreciate your support of the challenge and of my initiative this year to help the people who are descended from the culture of which the composer taught. And for everybody else out there who is supporting on Patreon or just being a nice active member of the community, commenting on things, you know what to do. This is your time to let Tyson know how you could help them with your insights, or even just let them know how much you like the score. I think this is a really likable entry. I think that it communicates really beautifully, even though it isn't incredibly complex or multi-layered. So at least Tyson deserves a tip of the hat for that, right? So thank you to all of you out there, and thank you once again to Tyson. And now, I think I'm going to go evaluate another score. So I'll see you with another one of those really, really soon.